Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another Axel 72 video, and in today's video I'm going to be giving my instant reaction to Anthony Cacace winning via TKO in round 9 versus Leigh Wood. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So, you know, as a lad myself who don't live too far away from the Nottingham region, it is sad to see Leigh Wood, you know, lose this fight and lose in quite a bad fashion because, you know, there's not too many boxers that have been able to represent Nottingham and fight at a high level and excite the fans the same way that Leigh Wood has been able to do, especially, you know, from this era. I mean, especially from Nottingham, there is the likes of an Ezra Taylor coming through and an Echo Esserman, but it's not quite the same kind of feeling in my opinion because I don't feel like they represent Nottingham just in the same way as what a Leigh Wood does. Leigh Wood obviously has caused, like I say, some amazing moments in British boxing and had some great fights, and yet again has sold out the Motorpoint Arena and has brought another great set of fans, including the Irish fans from Cacace as well, and created a really good atmosphere. And I feel like any Leigh Wood fight in which we've always seen a really good atmosphere. For this fight, though, there was a lot of question marks coming into it on Leigh Wood's side. Obviously, the inactivity at the age in which he's at is always going to play a factor. Of course, Cacace is at the same age, but he's been fighting more regularly and has been fighting at the weight class, of course, being the more natural super featherweight, and has been looking really good. Leigh Wood didn't look amazing against Josh Warrington, where he was, you know, getting outboxed for quite a big chunk of it, and you know he did end up, well, knock him out in impressive fashion, but it still wasn't, you know, the performance in which was a resounding, you know, convincing, dominating performance that perhaps we would have wanted to really prove that he was able to, you know, fight any guy at the world level. And, you know, when you look at his career, Leigh Wood, and the major wins in which he's had, especially in recent times, I mean, if you look at kind of how they've aged, perhaps it's not the best. In the moment, it's really exciting and amazing, but like I say, perhaps they haven't aged the best. I mean, the Conlon win was Conlon arguably at a really good point in his career, but still, you know, since then, Conlon's not been on a good run, and he got knocked out by Gill, and you know, he's making a bit of a comeback, but it's nothing that we've seen really too exciting so far as of yet. And, you know, he caused problems to Leigh Wood. And then also, you know, Lara knocked out Leigh Wood, and then Leigh Wood, of course, went to go avenge it and did that really well. But Lara, again, is another name in which hasn't really been able to return to the same kind of levels and heights in which he once was. And Josh Warrington as well. I mean, he, like I say, was relatively dominating of the performance before getting knocked out by Leigh Wood, and then Cacace went on to actually dominate the fight and win convincingly against Warrington. And you know, Warrington has been knocked out against Lopez as well, and again, you know, like I said, their performances haven't been the best, but perhaps it's arguably, you know, Leigh Wood getting the opponents at the right time in his career, but also at the same time, like I say, who really cares for that, to be honest, because it's still so entertaining whenever he's fought. And, you know, this fight was, I was expecting, and seemingly a lot of fans were expecting it to be a really entertaining clash by two guys who were just really fueled up, really fired up, and just ready to go and just stand and trade. And, you know, it ended up kind of leading into that near kind of the stoppage, but for the most part, it was actually quite a technical display of boxing. Cacace is a really underrated fighter and finally is getting the recognition that he deserved. I saw this after the Magnesi fight, to be completely honest, you know, before he even fought Cordina, where he looked good in that performance, and I thought he could really cause an upset to Cordina, and obviously he went on to do that, and I was, you know, really excited to see how his career led on from then. And now he's been on, like I say, an excellent run, and you know, it's the complete opposite side of things because Leigh Wood and Cacace obviously are the same age, but Cacace has been on such a great run. He's really coming into his own at the moment, and there's not too many fighters who, at 36 years of age, especially in the lower weight divisions as well, can really come into their own and start, you know, staking claims for being world champion and for being one of the top, or if not the top British guy. And Cacace now is in a position where, you know, he was a former champion and he can go on to then probably go on to fight a world champion next. And it is interesting to see what his motivation is, to be completely honest. I mean, you can see how fired up and how aggressive he is and how much he really enjoys fighting. So I don't feel like that passion is anything not there. But also at the same time, he said after the fight, and even in the build up to the fight as well, the reason why he vacated his title was because if he fought Nunez, he would have had to take a significant, pay decline compared to fighting Leigh Wood. And that's, no surprise. A domestic clash often does sell better and will get you a better payday than that of a world title defense in which is against a guy who, yes, is really entertaining in Sugar Nunez, but isn't really as known by British fans and, aren't going to get the same kind of level of recognition. But now, you know, we'll seemingly he will get a homecoming next, and that's what I said in my prediction he deserves. He definitely deserves that homecoming fight. And to be fair to him, he was saying that he was happy to go on to, go to America, go to wherever he needed to go to be able to get the big opportunities and the big fights. And that's the mindset in which he's had to have in his career because he hasn't been given the opportunities unless he's really worked hard to get there. And then now for Frank Warren to turn around and to say, you're going to get a return fight, you're going to get a homecoming, it must be amazing for Cacace to hear because he does deserve that more than anything, and he deserves an opportunity to reclaim his IBF belt. If he is able to do that out the winner of Nunez versus Rikishi, why not bring that to Ireland? Nunez, I'm sure, would take a fight in Ireland to fight the former IBF champion, which he was, supposed to fight, and, just let up his belt. So, hasn't beaten the top guy arguably yet, Nunez, if he does beat Rikishi. But if not, then maybe an Oshaki Foster. Perhaps he might be willing to come over. Possibly, maybe Navarrete versus Suarez is happening also tonight. Do I think Navarrete will come over to Ireland? Probably not. But, there are some good contests in the super featherweight division. And so I definitely think in which that, there is some good fights, but just no longer British fighters anymore because he has gone through all of them. I mean, the run he's been on is wiping out all the British top names realistically. Yes, not Conlon, but Conlon realistically isn't at the highest of levels anymore. So what he beat, Cordina when he was at the peak, Josh Warrington when yes he wasn't at the peak, but he still was at fighting at a good high level. Leigh Wood now as well. He isn't just stopping all the guys in their tracks at the best level in the super featherweight division. So for sure he deserves this opportunity to fight in Ireland. If he does fight Nunez and if Nunez does get through Rikishi, I think it's going to be an absolute firefight. I think Cacace is somebody who, yes, doesn't have arguably loads of stoppages on his record, but his power is really there and he really does wear you down and break you down, and every punch he does throw seems to have so much intent behind it. I'm surprised he hasn't been able to get more knockouts in his career. It's not like, say, one punch knockout power, but you could see when he was throwing the uppercuts and the body shots to Leigh Wood by the end, it had so much venom in them. It looked like it literally destroyed Leigh Wood, that body shot that he landed especially, and you could just tell he wanted nothing left. He had nothing left to give, and that was a Leigh Wood in which, was suspectedly better at the weight, stronger at the weight, and somebody who, yes, had been out for a while and yes, was on the older side of things, but somebody who has been able to recover from shots against a lot of top fighters and has been able to deal with getting hurt. And it just in this fight it seemed like he took these shots and he just couldn't recover. And so, that shows that perhaps there might not be too much left for Leigh Wood in his career, or, it does also highlight that Cacace does have that underestimated power. For, like I say, Leigh Wood's career now, he didn't say he's retiring. Perhaps there could be still other fights on the line. The thing is, with the fact of a Josh Warrington and a Mick Conlon around, it means that there is still big fights there available for Leigh Wood in the way of rematches because he's been in so many entertaining contests, and we still have these two guys around who aren't at a world level but are still wanting to have good fights. We could, like I say, still see Leigh Wood at 36 years of age go on to rematch Josh Warrington again. It seemingly was the case that we were going to see that at some point anyway. So maybe we could see that. Maybe we could see a Mick Conlon. If Mick Conlon and Josh Warrington fight each other, then maybe we could see the winner of that, go on to fight Leigh Wood for a rematch. There is a route there. I don't think any of them guys are going to be able to get back to a world level, but I think there is a route there for them to still fight each other. So do I think he should retire? No, to be honest, unless, of course, his health decisions or anything like that, he decides personally not to do that, then that's of course his choice. But in the way of entertainment, there is still some great matchups there that could happen for Leigh Wood. But going through the card, it was a good Queensberry DAZN card. It was their second one, and it was offering something a bit different. Yes, there wasn't loads of stoppages, and yes, it didn't have loads of crazy highlight reel moments, but it had some real close, well contested, like 50-50 on paper type fights, and fights in general, which to be fair, Ezra Taylor, Troy Jones, I didn't think was a 50-50. I thought Ezra Taylor would be able to dominate Troy Jones because I'd seen Jones fight in his last fight, and yes, he's not a bad fighter at an English level, but I didn't think he was that good of a fighter. I didn't think he was that well rounded. I thought he was quite a scrappy fighter. Yes, he would have made it difficult, but he wouldn't be able to have as much success as what he did versus Taylor. Taylor did dominate the fight and, won convincingly, but Jones did really well for himself and he took some big shots and, he had a damaged nose and you could see that he was, willing to go out on his shield. But Ezra Taylor really, did perhaps struggle a little bit at times fighting in close with Troy Jones, and that's something in which Taylor's going to have to be able to deal with moving up in the rankings because there is, a lot of fellow fighters. We look at Anthony Yard. Yard won against Lyndon Arthur by basically just fighting on the inside, same as Boatsi and Callum Smith as well. Their fight was pretty well fought on the inside, and so if somebody like an Ezra Taylor, who is now of course with Malik Scott, is going to try and get to that next kind of level, he is going to have to improve his inside game. It's not awful, but I think he's going to have to improve it a bit and, deal with the physical pressures of other fighters a little bit and, try and maybe turn up the gears a little bit more. A Louis Edmondson fight, I think, is a fight that does make sense. Of course, Taylor is now the WBA Continental Gold Light Heavyweight Champion, which, to be fair, doesn't really mean much, but I think he should fight Louis Edmondson next. I think it will make for an entertaining build-up, and I'm sure it will happen next. But I don't really rate Louis Edmondson that much, so maybe Taylor could get through that one. But I think there is some good, interesting matchups, and as the whole broadcast were talking about the entire fight, there is some great British light heavyweights amongst the scene, and the top 10 is looking really good. So there is some really good fights there to be made for someone like an Ezra as he progresses through. Speaking about Liam Davies versus Kurt Walker next, that was for the vacant IBF Intercontinental Featherweight title, and Liam Davies, of course, won by unanimous decision. He got a return victory after his defeat versus Shabazz Masood, and he looked good, he looked comfortable. I think he came out into the first round and he came out firing and he came out in the traditional way in which we've seen Liam Davies, where he plants his feet in the centre of the ring and he just, finds his range perfectly well and he just lets off a flurry of combinations. I was thinking that perhaps he might be trying to go for a really early stoppage and force it, and I thought maybe he could have done. Kurt Walker did take a couple of rounds to get into it a bit, but the more the fight grew on, I think Davis did calm down a little bit, settle down, use his experience, get into a really nice rhythm, get his movement going again, which was something in which we didn't really see too much against Masood. Masood was really moving well and causing him issues, but Walker was trying to bully him at times and, fights a completely different way and probably not the best of strategies against somebody like Liam Davis. But Davis, like I say, stayed calm, used his experience, fought well, mixed in the uppercuts nicely with the long rangy shots, and like I say, used his range really well with the long levers in which he has, and in general, like I say, fought well to a unanimous decision victory convincingly, and got through an unbeaten, tough competitor, and you got to give him credit for that, coming off the loss in which he was dealt to Shabazz Masood, which was quite a bad defeat. And, the run that he was on, the confidence in which he had, he definitely would have hurt his ego a little bit, that loss. So for him to want to take a top contender who's unbeaten as well, you got to give him that credit. He could have easily taken a couple fights to just try and rebuild, but he didn't want to do that. And like I say, you got to give him that credit. That puts him back into better positions now in the featherweight division. Perhaps, he might be losing his speed a little bit. It's nothing, he didn't look insanely quick or anything like that. But I think there's some good matchups there in the featherweight division. Do I think he would ever be able to get to a world level? Possibly not, to be completely honest. But like I say, I still believe there is some good featherweight fights on the table for him. Possibly, if he could maybe get onto a European level soon. And then the other fight in which I wanted to touch upon was Owen Cooper winning via points versus Chris Kongo. That was a good performance. Kongo came on good with his jab in the first few rounds and was fighting nicely off that, and we're thinking that, Owen Cooper would struggle getting through the long levers of that. But I like Cooper's bouncy, on his feet, explosive type of style where he was able to, really spring into his shots and get his hooks going. And, he was coming off a bad defeat as well, a really bad, devastating defeat to Echo Esserman, where, he got knocked out quite badly and quite scarily. I mean, I was there to watch that ringside live as well, and it was just, I was remember watching that thinking, wow, this could be something that could really affect Owen Cooper's career, because he is a really good underrated talent, but he did get knocked out badly there, and he does really like a scrap. And it seemed like there was times in which Kongo planted his feet and it could have gone into a bit more of a firefight, but Kongo didn't really want to do that. But Kongo has that tendency to get too relaxed in fights, and he did definitely do that. He dropped his guard and let Cooper just continuously get over and punch over his guard, in which he's really good at doing with them. Like I say, bouncy, explosive type of style, which he has. And inevitably, he won. He went on a streak. He won all the rounds that he needed to win into the mid to late rounds, and ended up winning. And like I say, he moves on now again. Another entertaining talent on the Queensbury scene, and a very big card, a 12 fight card from Queensbury, and a great show. And we now will wait and see what happens with all these fighters next. And the next big show is, of course, next weekend. Every single week we've got a good British big show happening. It's Johnny Fisher versus Dave Allen, a rematch. I'm excited for that. But yeah, that is it for today's video. Hope you did enjoy. Like the video if you did. Need like the video, subscribe if you're new, and thanks for watching.